Hi there. I'm Joe Dudek, president and founder of Keyhole Marketing.
And I'm Shannon Jarek. I work for Keyhole as the assistant brand manager.
And this is Metaphorically Speaking, a podcast that explores the mysterious side of marketing.
Welcome to Metaphorically Speaking. We are excited to be joining you for another episode. We had just an incredible conversation with Timothy Gillis, otherwise known as T.H. Gillis, who just has an incredible story. We love talking with people who kind of have just a pivotal change in their lives or something that really just defines them as a person. And with Timothy, he has a really unique story. He is a full-time accountant, and has been in the accounting world and in the law practice for much of his adult life. So accountant by day and poet by night, if you will. So not necessarily a common type of person. You wouldn't necessarily expect somebody who's an accountant to just kind of be an artist. He doesn't have the term artist as his full-time career, if you will, but he's just inspired by the world around him and has decided to write about it.
Yeah, I love always exploring with business owners, entrepreneurs, artists, what was that plot twist that happened in their life that led them not necessarily away from what they were doing, but maybe added another path along their journey. And that's the case here of just, he continues in his craft as far as an accountant at KPMG, but he has this other side that he's been tapping into the last couple of years on this creative space and letting that come out through poetry, which is a unique art form. I think it's like, it's not just him rambling through some sort of prose. He's putting this into a form that can be difficult to create and sometimes a task to comprehend, but I think he's done it really well. And most certainly in his most recent book, Eyesight, What I Saw, which he published, I guess technically this year, but he sent off to the printer late last year, which was really a collection of observations he saw in 2020, which what a year to observe what's going on. And that was just his way of really processing all the kind of chaos of the year.
Yeah. And I love how he's so open to just talking about the vulnerability that comes behind poetry, and not just poetry, but sharing your art, and you listen to him speak and he has definitely that two sides of his brain, that juxtaposition. He's analytical and logical, but you can hear just the movement and the meaning behind his words and the inspiration that he finds when he just pauses and observes the world around him. And he mentions kind of jumping into that vulnerability. It's scary to share your artwork. Joe, you're a photographer. It's scary to sometimes share those images and, wonder what people will think about them, or for any artists out there to share their music or something. And Tim just says, I encourage people to just find that vulnerability. And even if it's just for yourself,
Yeah. That is the scary part of, you can always create these things, put it in your journal, keep it on your camera, keep it on your laptop, whatever it may be. But it's difficult to put it out there for somebody else. And you're not always sure who that somebody else is. And you're most often creating it for yourself. So I think that can be the challenge of like, how will this be received by people who I didn't really intend to see it when I first wrote it or created it. And so that was a huge risk I thought he took. And he and I had a conversation years ago when he released his first book. And, he was on that edge of, do I share this? Do I do something with this? And I'm glad he followed that nudge a little bit and produced that book in 2017 and then this new one in 2020.
Yeah. And we're just grateful that we can be a part of that too. Tim was able to kind of share that with everybody. So if you're interested in his most recent book, you can visit thgillis.us and click the order now button on the homepage, and it'll take you right to that spot where you can order it. It's a beautiful book, just a really great reflection on the year of 2020 that we all experienced and kind of the hardships and pain and journey that the world took last year. So just a really meaningful book for everyone there, something everyone can get out of it.
Yeah. And I think like, even if you're not a huge fan of poetry, maybe there's a friend or family member you could consider purchasing this for. It's only $25 and all proceeds every penny of it goes to the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation, which Tim unpacks in the podcast, like why that organization stood out to him. And ultimately what they do is just provide grants for mental health research, and just a beautiful organization, what they're doing. And it's super gracious of him to donate all of the proceeds from the sales of this to that organization. So again, if you're on the fence about poetry, there's certainly it's a win-win, I think, for you to get this and fund that kind of research.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Tim, for joining this conversation and just being vulnerable with us. And we hope that you guys enjoy the episode.
I always like to get these interviews started with just a little bit of a better understanding of, who you are as a person, where'd you grow up, and that sort of thing. And I know you work in D.C. right now, and you live outside the district. And you're a partner at KPMG and one of the big four accounting firms, but you also started from some humble beginnings. Talk a little bit about your childhood, if you would, Tim, just to kind of help set the stage.
Yeah, I grew up in South Georgia. My parents had married when they were 19 and 16, and they were farmers. They didn't have much at all and didn't have much education. Mom graduated from 11th grade, and I think Dad made it through something a lot less than that, maybe 8th grade. And the way they've told it is that Mom helped Dad learn to read about the time I was born, when he was about 35 years old.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So they moved from, small town. It wasn't even town, from very rural to a small town called Macon, Georgia. And they did that sometime in the 1960 time frame or so. And so I grew up in a small town south of Atlanta, about 100 miles south of Atlanta.
You've got a few siblings. Where do you fit in the birth order?
Yeah, I'm third, and really we had two families. My older brother and sister are 10 and 12 years older than me, and my younger sister is 3 years younger than me. So there were four of us, and we had a very, very delightful and loving growing up household.
Yeah. Do you have some like fond memories that come to your mind when you think about your childhood?
Oh, plenty. Even right now, we're having the cicada invasion here for Brood X on the East Coast right now. And although I don't think we had Brood X down in South Georgia, I do remember when I was very young, harvesting cicada exoskeletons from trees.
For sure.
I thought it was really cool then, and I still think it's unique now.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of growing up in a small town, what was the height of your aspirations? And what did you hope to achieve with your life? Did you have big dreams, or did they were they a little bit closer to home and not quite as aspirational?
I think for the longest time, I thought I would come back and run Dad's gas station, to tell you the truth. And sometime in college, I realized that that might not be the future, and decided to move into an area where I knew I could get a job, and that was in the field of accounting. And I played a lot of team sports, and so the reason I went to my undergrad school was because of a sports opportunity. But coming out of undergrad and then working in accounting, at some point I decided it was time to go back to law school, and I did that in 1988.
Gotcha. Yeah, kind of give us a quick. Before we get into the book conversation, what we're going to really kind of talk about mostly today, just paint a little picture of your full-time job. I know you're at KPMG now, but just kind of give a sense of like, what was your career path? Because I think it provides a pretty good contextual backdrop of, really kind of how adventurous it was to jump from the day job to sort of what we're going to talk about today with these two poetry books.
Sure. Well, I left law practice in 1998 and joined KPMG. I was a tax lawyer in my law practice, and that naturally flows over to the big four accounting firms. And so in 1998, several of them approached a number of partners in my law firm. Many of them went to another competitor, and I decided to throw it open a little broader. I remember calling my dad and say, "Dad, what do you think about me leaving law practice and going back to what was then the big six accounting firms?" And he said, "Son, I don't understand anything you do. I would go. He did, but I would go wherever you can help the most people for good, and it just seemed like that was really excellent wisdom. So I came over in 1998, and then went through a series. I was in Atlanta at first, and then gradually I moved to Washington in 2001. And then through a series of incidents, became a leader of a practice in 2004. That went really well. And once something goes really well, things sort of build upon each other. Eventually, I ended up traveling globally for 7 years. And now I'm back as the managing partner in the Washington, D.C. metro area for KPMG.
Yeah. I think that's just helps paint a good picture of just what one assumes the life of an accountant would be. And then you've got this other side of your brain that you're tapping into really the last several years. And I think that it's a pretty good juxtaposition. When you think about it, as we kind of transition into the books that you've written, do you have some favorite works or favorite authors that you find yourself turning to regularly? And what are some of the things that those books or those authors sort of give you? What do you receive from them that calls you back a lot?
Yeah, I've long been drawn to writers like C.S. Lewis. Read all of the Chronicles of Narnia to my kids, and at least the older ones, and then a few of them to the younger ones. Sort of ran out of gas at some point, but so I've always been drawn to him. But I would say it was in 1996 or 97. I remember Robin Williams was hosting the Oscars, and he introduced someone for the Lifetime Achievement Award, and it was remarkable because in the speech there was a reference to Robert Frost, although it wasn't reference to Robert Frost. It was just simply a quote from Robert Frost. And that quote really seized me. I had never really appreciated poetry as a kid. Certainly had to memorize some, present some in English classes in high school and maybe first or second year of college. But it never really had grabbed me. And these two lines from Robert Frost really did grab me. And those two lines were, "But yield who will to their separation. My object in living is to unite my avocation and my vocation as my two eyes make one in sight." And when I heard that on the Oscars that night, I thought, wow, that is really powerful. It's the integration of sort of all parts of your life, your work life, your home life, everything, to make your life feel like it does when you see out of two eyes, but you see one vision. And really, it was a really beautiful moment for me. And so if I go back in time, that was probably about 11 or 12 years before I started journaling and blogging on a private blog. But I would say it was probably very, very instrumental to me and very, very meaningful moment for me. The other one I would say is there's a recording artist who died young, and he was a poet more than he was a recording artist. I think he may not think it that way, but I was just even today re-listening to some of those old tunes, and I thought, wow, that poetry really got deeply inside of me and really changed my view from what I had as a high schooler, which was, oh boy, we have to go through this again. It really changed me into realizing that poetry is a really remarkable medium.
Yeah. And you were how old when you saw that Oscars show?
I must have been 33 or 34, 35 maybe. Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, what's kind of an earlier memory, or maybe the earliest memory you have of something you wrote? And obviously we have stuff for school, but maybe something outside of a required assignment. But was there something that you wrote that, and did you find that to be a positive experience? Did you feel affirmed in that moment, in that memory, or did that not sit as well as you would have hoped? How'd that land?
I'm smiling because it was actually my transition from law practice back to the accounting firm world. I took some time off, went by myself to a cabin in the North Georgia mountains, and I journaled over a weekend about that transition, about whether I wanted to make that move or not. And it was really very helpful. Somewhere I still have those notes. I'm not sure which journal they are in anymore, but I think that was a very meaningful moment as well. So it was really directional in thinking about how I think better when I write it down.
What's your process? We've talked a little bit about your place in the accounting world, and as we kind of dive a little deeper into these books that you wrote, what's been your writing process? Is there a ritual or something that you sort of switch from that side of your brain, more the analytical side, to the creative side? Do you just write when it hits you in the moment of the day? How do you enter into that writing zone?
I'm really seized by moments, and it just occurred to me today that I think there are 1,440 minutes in a day and 60 seconds in each minute. But there are also moments which are really powerfully communicative. And when I see one of those moments, I'm at the point now where I kind of know it. And I know I'm going to write something about that. One of them and we'll get to the book, I guess, but one of them in the new book is about go with me to the beach and watch the children at the age of 3 play by the sea. And that was a really powerful, meaningful moment to me. It was shocking to me how a 3-year-old, the way they jump at the ocean edge, on the shore, they're not confined by gravity the way I am. and then gravity to me played out differently. It played out from, it's not just gravity, the law of gravity, but also the gravity of life, the gravitas, so to speak. They don't care about that, and they're just having fun. And so that has a way that type of moment sort of, it grabs my attention, and then I try to just turn it over in my head a little while. And sometimes sometimes it can come right away, and sometimes I'll just noodle on something for a month or two, and then out comes something.
Yeah, you'll scribble that moment down to be processed at the right time. We had a moment about that recently with our son playing in the backyard with the 2 girls who live right behind us. And I mean, they're just screaming and laughing and having a great time. And they're around, 6 to 10-year-old range. And I just was thinking, how beautiful that time was, and how can we as adults return to that? Is it possible? Is it not? The same sort of process, we're not even coming to like a complete conclusion, but really just reveling in that excitement that they have for life. And it's uncontained, unreserved, and just thinking, how can I return to that at this stage of life?
One of the things that's beautiful about writing and about keeping a journal, about keeping a blog, is that you begin to learn where you are. Where am I emotionally? If you keep that journal long enough, you will know exactly where you are emotionally. And there have been times when I've realized, wow, I'm really dark. And the beauty of that is that instead of staying in it, then what journaling does is say, I really need to look for joy. And that was one of the outgrowths of the first book that you helped me. I mean, you were very instrumental in that first book and helping me, encouraging me to do it. But one of we let off that book, I let it off with a poem called Where to Find Joy. And that poem came about simply because journaling had led me to understand that I was not in a joyful place. And then I started trying to figure out, well, where do you find it? When you're not joyful, where do you find it? And then what I found is you find it everywhere. And you just have to be observant, in a still spot, observant, and just let yourself, like those children that you've described playing, just let yourself enjoy the miraculous nature of the world we're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it can really be an everyday experiences. I had one recently walking out of Costco, which is not usually a pleasurable experience, but walked by this older couple who were walking in, and there was something about them. I still think fondly of them, and I never talked to them. They probably have no idea that I even noticed them, but it was just for some reason sits really well in my memory of just a positive experience about this couple walking in. And that was a brief lapse of time. And I have no idea what their story was. They could have been fighting all day long. I have no idea what their situation was, but it was just a beautiful experience just walking past them.
In book Eyesight, I've got a poem that's about that very thing. I watched an older couple, exit the southbound train from New York to Washington, and they had been, they were older couple and they had been through a lot. You could tell because the woman had experienced a stroke and it was obvious, and she was holding on, and the man was guiding her. And even that moment in time was so powerfully expressive to me that one of the poems in the new book, Full Flower, talks about the full flower of love, and it's not found, in my view, in the young in heart, but in people like this couple exiting the train. And it was really a beautiful moment for me.
Raise your hand if you've heard the term FOMO. Okay, just kidding. This is a podcast. I cannot see anything. I do hope a few of you were gullible enough to participate, though. FOMO is the fear of missing out, aka what Joe is feeling by not being a part of this podcast ad break. Your small business marketing strategy is experiencing FOMO. It's missing out on something. It's not spending more money on social media ads. It's not door-to-door knocking. It's not hanging flyers in your local coffee shop or spamming your customers' inboxes with daily emails. The biggest piece your marketing strategy is missing might surprise you. It's blogging. It's been found that companies who blog typically gain at least twice as much web traffic as those that don't blog. And 61% of US consumers say they have made a purchase based solely on a blog. So if you want to stand out from the crowd, spend less dollars on marketing, be listed in relevant Google search results, be known as the local industry expert on your product or service, and finally inspire people to take action, then you are already raising your hand to say that blogging is a good fit for your small business. Now, we recognize the challenges and confusion wrapped up in adding a blog to your digital marketing strategy, and that's why we want to help. So visit keyholemarketing.us/getblogging to discover the 22 reasons why your small business should have a blog, to hear some real talk on why you're avoiding it, and to learn 11 ways that we can help you get one started and keep it going.
How did you get to a place where you felt comfortable or I don't know, inspired enough to create books from your writings? That's a big step for a lot of people who are just at a place where they've been journaling for a long time, exercising their thoughts, putting them into some sort of form, but to now put that in a place where you're ready to share that with somebody else. It's already hard enough when it's somebody you know, but then to put it in a place where strangers can enter there and do it. How did you jump from journal entry to this needs to be shared with others outside of that space?
It's been a very slow dance for me, honestly. I started my blog in 2008, and I didn't share it with anyone except family and friends. And frankly, I think only about 3 people actually ever read it. Mm-hmm. And then, as you know, you and I were having a drink one day, and you turned to me and said, you really ought to think about publishing these. And I turned back to you and said, no, it's just for me. And it's not that, it's not that good. And you said, well, I'll tell you what, just turn it over to me and I'll take care of it. And so the hard part for me was releasing my grip right then and letting you do it. And yet I decided, I don't know where this goes from here, but let's go with it and see. And what's been amazing since then has been, it's really become a part of who I am in my everyday work now. It's like Robert Frost is, as my two eyes make one in sight. Poetry is now at the center of my personal life, and it's become even central in my professional life. In the last week alone, I've had three clients actually, send me notes asking if they could have a discussion with me about the process of poetry. And who would have thought that would have ever happened? And so it was really, your encouragement to begin with, and then the encouragement of so many others. And then I recorded a few videos. I would call them little 5-minute snippets of, explaining a poem. And we put those out on YouTube, and they're now on my website. And then I did a reading for about 25 people, and all along the way, all I've heard is encouragement. And I think part of the reason for that is people really respond to vulnerability and transparency, and that's what my writing is about. It's at least the first book was clearly transparency and vulnerability. The second book more about observation, about what I saw. But I think that first book really gave me, if I can be that vulnerable and that transparent amongst both family, friends, and then into a third category of strangers even, then and the response has been so positive, then you know what? Let's give it a whirl. Let's keep going.
Yeah. With Eyesight, you just mentioned, what you saw, your observations from the year, and it was a tumultuous 2020 in a lot of ways, of course, with the pandemic and political season, racial tensions. I mean, it was just had a whirlwind of events. When you talk about your observations, would you characterize that book as your observations of the external world, or maybe observations of your internal processing of those events, your emotions? How was it a mix of both external and internal?
I think the first book was probably more about my internal, and I think the second book was more about external, what I saw, finding events, finding moments, finding a tree in a woodland trust and thinking about it. And yet I would say that you can't, in some sense, you can't separate your internal feelings from that. But I would say the first one to me is the first book was much more introspective, and the second one had that sort of extra vision component to it.
Yeah. When you put a book, I don't know, are you writing, as you're writing some of these pieces, are you writing with people in mind? Are they purely for yourself? I mean, kind of, I always think about that with, obviously from a marketing standpoint, we're always thinking about the audience, who's going to need to see this, what are their motivational points. As a author of these types of books, is it void of an audience, or are you picking somebody to write these things to?
I think for me, it's more to preserve a moment. It's like photography for me. So when I go back and read some of the poems in Eyesight, Autumn Tender, and many others there's one called Brown Bird. There's one called Little Wren that's only 15 words long, but I can remember exactly where I was and why I wrote that one. And so for me, it's as powerful to me as a photograph. And I have to tell you, that's really unique for me, because I'm usually a very visual person. So people will come in with, in my business, they'll come in with a spreadsheet, or they'll come in with a PowerPoint document with loads of words on it. And I just want them to simplify it into a picture. But for some reason, poetry does that for me too. And so I haven't quite figured that piece out yet, but it's fun to think through that.
Yeah. I can relate to that as well. I can remember just odd details about photographs that I've taken. You could ask, Lindsay will ask me all the time. My wife will ask me, what do you, when did this happen? Or I have no recollection of those like common facts of life. But yeah, as far as like where I stood and what the direction the sun was and the weather, the conditions, when I took a photograph like that, always sticks with me, which is crazy.
I totally understand that. And I'm laughing as you go about that one.
Yeah. One of my favorites, I was going to ask you like, what are one of your favorites, but that's kind of like if somebody asked, what's your favorite photo you took? You're just never gonna, it's like, what's your favorite child? But Timeless was one you had written and then also had it made produced into a musical track, which I'm pulling that one out because I really think people should spend time listening to that track. And of course read the original piece as well. But can you talk a little bit about the genesis of that particular poem?
Yeah. Well, first, let me just say this. I think you started asking me which is my favorite, and you're right. It's like a child; you can't have one, and right. And I don't have one. Every time
which is your favorite child? Well, can you tell me which is your favorite child?
No, they might hear this, so right. No, I don't have a favorite child. The Timeless was a really interesting one for me because for years I've had a photograph that was taken at Kiowa Island. It was to celebrate my mom's 80th birthday. And we have family photographs. We had a photographer come in and take some expanded family photographs and then some one-offs. And one of them sits on the credenza right just between the kitchen and sort of a living room area of the house here. And I kept looking at it one day, and I'm empty nested now, and the kids are gone, and I just kept dwelling on that photograph until Timeless, the poem, came out. And it's about how one day you'll come to see that this photograph has a timeless quality. And it's interesting how that turned into a song, because I didn't ask. I did commission a group of Berkeley College of Music students during the pandemic. They were out of school, and it was an awkward time for everybody that was in school. I did commission them to do one song from the new book, and I didn't tell them which one to pick. And independently, they picked Timeless. And I have to tell you, I love the song, and I love it more the more I hear it. So the first time I heard it, I was, thinking, okay, great. And now I listen to it and I can't stop singing along with it. And it does have, even the song now has a timeless quality for me as well. So the photograph is even more meaningful because of both the words that we put to it and the music that the students put to it.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. There's something about it that I'm always drawn back to it. And I have my own connection to the song. It brings back connections to photographs I've taken in the past. And it kind of it doesn't have a Simon and Garfunkel sound to it, but it has that kind of feel to it where you just feel like it just pulls you into a memory. They talk about photographs in some of their songs, but I don't know, it has that kind of draw for me.
The song's only 3 minutes and 14 seconds long, and the first 30 seconds are a group of the students that are really just humming. And so it's not a very long song, but if you go back to some of those great Beatles songs, they were very short. Blackbird, for example, I've been singing a lot lately, and Blackbird's only about 2 minutes long. And yet it's a hauntingly beautiful song, and it brings you right back to a particular moment. So I'm really glad they did that, and thanks for asking about it. It really has reinforced that poem for me as a another one of those, like, I'm smiling. It's a really meaningful moment.
One day you will come to see that this old photograph framed on the oaken credenza.
It's beautiful too that they were able to preserve that memory. I think that sometimes can be the risk of creating something like that. If you're asking somebody to create a piece that it could have gone a lot of directions, right? You weren't really artistically orchestrating what obviously you didn't even tell them what song to pick, but also you didn't give them a certain sound or genre. And I don't know, they just felt like they landed it really well. And I felt like at the end of the day, it preserved and really revered that memory and protected that. I think they did a great job with that.
The funniest part is that they had to rearrange some of the lines so that it would work in a song, and I like the way they rearranged it even better. So if I had to go back and do it again,
yeah, maybe in the next edition of the book you'll make a couple edits.
Exactly.
What do you hope? Just a couple more questions. What do you ultimately hope readers glean from both of your books? And maybe it's different for each one, but what do you hope that people get when they receive those and take them for themselves?
I just want poetry to be an accessible form of art for people. And I think it's inaccessible for a lot of people. And in the end, it's really been helpful for me with mental health, with strength, resilience. And that's really hard for me to describe for you other than say it was sort of a learned habit. It was a form of mindfulness. It was a form of meditation. It was a form of prayer. And it really readjusted sort of what I think about all of those topics: mindfulness, meditation, prayer. They have become my prayers. That is my book of Psalms, so to speak. And I think it's true that I don't know that anyone can do it, but I know that anyone can enjoy the moment that I describe. In other words, I know that if you can just let yourself breathe and think about the beauty in your life, that I know it will transform you for better. And the other thing you'll see in the book a lot is I'm constantly drawn to how magical this world that we live in really is. And the truth is, as adults, we sort of lose that sense of magic. And you have it as a kid, and maybe that's why the New Testament talks about the faith of a little child. It's so freeing to go back and let yourself enjoy the wonder of what's all around us and how we're just a part of something really, really, really unbelievable. And I hope that people would take from it that that's something that all of us can experience. Some probably more than others, but I do think that there are moments that are really, really special. And if we can hang on to those and realize how great they are, it can really transform our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you said something to me, man, might have been around the time of the creation of Evensong, Poems from Pilgrims book. You just mentioned something about sort of the other side of life. And it's at that time, I mean, there's such a significant age gap between you and me. I'm just joking. But it was the awareness of a time is coming where you are on the other side of, you've lived at a place where you're about halfway through, or you might have already lived more than you probably will on the other side of life. And it just stuck with me, and it's stuck with me since we moved out here to Colorado, with that visual of mountains and going up the mountain and being at the peak, and sort of, as you're headed down a different path on, at another stage of life. But I think that connects with what you just said. You'd be able to sort of like just realize that time is fleeting and moments pass, and there is a different way you navigate through life when you're walking up the mountain, just with this sense of bravado, as every minute is just yours and you can do it whatever you want with it. And there's much more of a preservation I've noticed of each moment, each experience, because you just realize like there's less and less of those as time goes on.
It's amazing how brief life actually is, and I love seeing into what could exist on even the other side of the other side, if you know what I mean by that, right? And so I don't think we'll get a perfect picture of that here, but yeah, I'm certainly on the second half of my life, and so then you start just thinking, okay, so how can I really thoroughly inhale, breathe in, and experience as many moments as I can without letting myself get too stressed or carry too much burden or worry, really to be free. And so when you ask about, by the way, I do write mainly for myself, but in this book, Eyesight, it was a 2020 New Year's resolution. And I didn't realize where it would go fully, but I know what I wanted to do is I wanted to free myself from self-judgment and self-criticism. And at the end of the foreword of that book, I invite people to join me, because what I realized is that when you do reach that freedom, you do feel, maybe for the first time, that you're truly free. And yes, I'm going to screw up. Yes, everything I do isn't going to be perfect or even optimal, but that's okay.
For sure. Both books can be purchased, I know right now, via Amazon, and all proceeds go to benefit the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation, which I believe gives grants to help fund research and studies for mental health. Why did that organization stand out to you? How did that how did you get connected to that?
Yeah, it's a great story. So I was looking for a way to get involved with mental health more directly. There's a lot of reasons for that personally, that I would like to move into that area. And so even for myself, frankly, because sometimes I do go into this like introspective hole and I have to come out of it, right? And so poetry has been great for me, mindfulness, meditation, and the like. But I know that so many people do struggle with mental health in a much more powerful way than I do. And so I was looking for something, and I called a few charities, some of which deal one-on-one with, try to help families who have, particular needs that involve mental health. But I was particularly drawn to research for some reason. I just don't know that we know enough about the brain at this point, and our emotions and how our physiology works. And our neurology works, frankly. And so I literally sent off a few emails to board members of a few charities and BBRF, Brain and Behavior Research Foundation, which is also bbrf.org. They were one of the board members got back to me right away, and we had a wonderful discussion. Shortly thereafter, I talked to the president. They informed me that they have a show on PBS called Healthy Minds. So I watched a few episodes of Healthy Minds, and I was really sold on what they're doing. So what they do is they fund early stage research. This is research before it, once it gets to the National Institutes of Mental Health, a lot of that research is fairly far down the road. And so, they're documenting what's necessary to get a new cure or a new treatment out the door. But I was really interested in sort of early stage research, and that's exactly what Brain and Behavior Research Foundation funds. And so it's been a great last year of getting to know them, and I have to tell you, at all turns, I've been very impressed by what they're doing, and I love the fact that a scientific council decides where all the grants go, and some of their early stage research is very meaningful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, even if you're on the fence about liking poetry or not, just to know that you're able to support that foundation through a purchase of the book has to make everybody feel good, especially this time where mental health is certainly on the rise.
Yes. Yeah. So Joe, since I'm still working, I didn't want there to be any confusion with people about what's he doing? Is he like trying to make money off of this? The truth is, I publish these books personally. I pay for everything. We do the printing. We do a terrific, high quality job using you and your friends at CoMotion Studio to do the books. I'm not going to make any money on it, but I just didn't even want there to be any perception of that. It costs a lot to print these books. I promise to people they'll look good on their coffee table or their bookshelf because they're really so beautifully put together. Yeah. But no, I just didn't want there to be a perception issue, and so by making this a charitable fundraiser, it's just turned it into, frankly, a lot of fun for me and something with purpose.
Mm-hmm. Just one last question. What would you say to other artists, maybe even other accountants turned artists who are maybe on the verge of, sharing their art with the world, but haven't quite gotten to that place where they feel comfortable with, what would be some words of encouragement you might offer them?
I've really been struck lately by how many poets are just quietly do their thing in the background, and then one day it gets published.
Mm-hmm.
And in other words, they're not striking out to be, a world recognized poet. And I think there are a lot of lay poets like me, and I would encourage anyone to try it. It's there are no rules. You can make it whatever you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty of it for me has been, I can say some things in poetry that I just can't say any other way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that freedom to express myself in a new way is so affirming, and so brings me such joy that I would encourage anyone to just give it a try. I mean, I watched a movie recently, and Walt Whitman, a Walt Whitman like persona was in there. So I started reading up on Walt Whitman again, and realized, like a lot of us, he's I'm going to use a British term here. He's completely bonkers, but that's okay. I mean, it can just, he wrote on his own. He had one book. He kept adding a poem all the time. And so the book that he published in 1855 was the same book that got published at the end of his life in whatever it was, like 30, 40 years later. And it just kept expanding it and re-editing it. He didn't have any. And so you can make it whatever you like to be. I've got a call next week with someone in Malaysia who reached out and said they've been looking through the website. They haven't even received the book yet, and they've been looking through the website, and they said, "Can we just talk about your process? And I'd like to learn more about that." And I want to make he like me wants to make poetry accessible to people, and so hopefully. I just encourage people just to give it a try, and I hope that what they find in my poetry is something that's accessible and meaningful.
Yeah, and I know that having done photography for years and putting it out there and selling some pieces and sharing some images over the years, I think the first step to put it out there was hard a little bit, because you're never really sure. You get some positive feedback from some people who are in your tight circle. Your mom loves it, and then maybe we should expand this a little bit to make sure it's really as good as what that tight circle says. But I think what I've learned over those years too has just been to continue to produce it for myself, capture images that catch my eye, and if it's low on Instagram likes, that's okay, because I still found a moment, and there was some satisfaction in, these rotten tree rings from this tree that nobody else would have cared about. But for me, it stopped me in my tracks. And I think there's been times where I've slipped into that slope of accolades and praise from people via different mediums. And I think for me, it's always been helpful to just come back to that. I go, just keep producing for myself and not be so concerned about the feedback.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that has been, if you can free yourself from self-judgment and self-criticism, you can also free yourself from the criticism of others. It's amazing to me how our harshest critics, or my harshest critic at least, is myself.
For sure.
And so working on this has really made me realize that, every poem's not going to resonate with everyone else. But guess what? It's meaningful for me. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting to see when people email me or text me back and they say, "Wow, I really got a lot out of this poem." Mm-hmm. That poem, whatever it is, and by the way, it's always something different, right? Every single one resonates with people differently than others, and so it's just terrific to do that. So I might close, if you don't mind, with because you've made me think about. This is my advice to anyone listening about what I might encourage them to do. Is the first poem in Eyesight is actually called "Open Up."
Perfect. Why don't we just close on that? So I'll just thank you right now for joining the podcast and for sharing your thoughts, and we'll just close it off with you reading that, if you would.
Great. Open up. Somewhere inside, there is an artist latent, waiting to be revived in the heart, in the soul. afraid to observe, much less depict what lies within. The complication of that is the beauty of the missed opportunity to behold an unwritten story, a tale of courage and glory that deserves to be told.
You've been listening to the Metaphorically Speaking podcast. At Keyhole Marketing, we tell big stories for small businesses. If you're in the Colorado Springs area and ready to tell your business story, we'd love to come alongside you and help you with your content, branding, SEO, social media, or photography needs. For an instant glimpse at your current marketing's strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, take our free marketing assessment at keyholemarketing.us/marketing-assessment, or send us an email at hi@keyholemarketing.us and let us know how we can help tell your story.